Hello there. Welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. We're streaming live across YouTube and Twitch. Good to have you all with us. So it's a big night for Celtic this evening. AZ Alkmaar in the second leg of the Europa League playoffs. Celtic have a 2-goal advantage from last week, and we're going to take a look at that game as well as looking back at a busy week for Celtic all in all. Joko James is with me as always. Joko, how are you?
Hey, good, Enda.
I
Yourself?
always call you Joko by accident. It's James is your real name, so
Doesn't matter. I go by it. Doesn't matter.
Alan Morrison is with me as well, aka Celtic by Numbers. Less difficult to complicate your name with your title.
Thank you. I hope you're well.
I'm all good. I'm excited going into the game tonight. So
Sure.
obviously, look, there was a lot going on off the pitch this week as well in the world of Celtic. The video emerging at the weekend of Rangers fans racially abusing Kyogo Furuhashi. We're not going to delve too deep into that tonight because, as Anne said himself, there doesn't need to be endless debate about this on radio and on television and on podcasts like us, because what happened, it was wrong. And that's all that really needs to be said about it. It doesn't need debate. It doesn't need to be discussed. It was wrong. It was dealt with. And it was good of Rangers to actually ban those fans as well. So we're happy to see that dealt with. And we're going to just concentrate on the pitch stuff on the podcast tonight. So I'm glad that it was dealt with in a swift manner and that we don't have to debate it. So happily enough, Kyogo will move on from this and we will support him here on the podcast as well. So we do have to look ahead to this AZ Alkmaar game, but we want to look back to the St Mirren game at the weekend, because ultimately that will sort of play into what's going to happen tonight with the game plan, the starting 11, what's going to happen with midfield. So we haven't actually spoken about St Mirren just yet. 6-0 at the weekend. Celtic won. David Turnbull with a hat-trick. Abada with a double and Edouard getting in the action as well. There was a change in midfield. Christie came in as the number 8. Turnbull obviously again got his hat-trick as a result of that. Abada scoring again. So Alan, do you want to kick us off here with this St Mirren win? Obviously, you know, the red card clearly plays a big role in this game, but ultimately I think it would have been a fairly strong Celtic performance, a fairly strong win anyway without that red card.
That seems to be the way that at the moment we're 9 games in and we seem to be building up a consistent record of creating a lot of chances, having a lot of shots, a lot of expected goals. And that's a great habit and a great direction of travel that we're on. There's no reason to suggest that the St Mirren game would have been any different. I think Willie Collum did his best to ruin it for everybody. Frankly, St Mirren got the rough end of a couple of calls, and there was just numerous things which he got wrong, basically, all over the place. So, but aside from that, in terms of the Celtic performance, again, a lot of standout performances individually. Abada and Turnbull, obviously got the headlines, and rightly so. Their attacking output was immense, frankly, across all the various attacking metrics that we capture. Did a piece on this on the Celtic by Numbers site if you want to dig into it in more detail. But essentially, if you look across, chances created, Turnbull created 2 chances, but Abad actually created 8 chances. Turnbull had 4 shots on target and a hat-trick. He also was again, for the 3rd time in 4 games, hit over 100 in his packing score, which means he's either receiving forward passes or giving forward passes to a very, very high level. Abada actually topped the team in that regard. And he also topped the team in terms of expected scoring contribution, which is expected goals plus expected assists. He actually had a scoring contribution of 3, and his expected scoring contribution was actually 2.7. So it just insane numbers, really. I know it's only 1 game. I know it's against 10 players, but we've seen plenty of Celtic games against teams of similar caliber where we've got nothing like these numbers, and I think we're already 9 games into the season, and in 5 of those games we've posted more than 3 expected goals. And last season we did that 7 times in 53 games, right? So even in in 1920, which was Celtic played really well, as I've said many times by any metrics. You can correct me, that's fine, but it was something like a dozen expected goals instances over 3. We've already got 5, so this is shaping up to be I don't know if he called 2 6-0s a pattern, but the Hearts game actually, even though it was 3-2, was very similar in terms of the base underlying data. So yeah, a lot to be positive about, frankly.
Yeah, James, it was often a cliche that you learn more from your defeats than you do from your victories. And it is hard to know what you learn from a 6-0 win over a team that had a man sent off. But what I took from it was Celtic lost against St Mirren in Celtic Park last year in this exact fixture around the same time. This year, they were a completely different team, a completely dominant side. And I think most importantly, we were the ones shaping what happened in that game as opposed to St Mirren coming and trying to, force their game plan upon Celtic.
Yeah, if I'm going to try and offer some balance, I mean, again, it's difficult to offer balance when you win like that. But in the 19 minutes before the red card, they had the offside goal, which probably shouldn't have been an offside goal, chopped off. I think that happened in that 19 minutes. Is that correct, Alan?
It was after.
It was after that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it was when they were with 10 men. Okay.
Yeah. Celtic kind of went to sleep after the sending off a little bit, and
it wasn't too long after.
A really good
right?
spell. Yeah.
So it wasn't too long after.
Yeah. You had Christie's kind of quite reckless challenge, and then you had the sending off.
That's right.
All after the first goal and after that sending. Yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't rewatch that game. I've been rewatching Alkmaar for obvious reasons heading into today. But if you just look at that 19 minutes, we did a little bit, but not a lot. I mean, we as far as actual chance creation, they didn't do anything. So it's that never-ending waves of attack that we put forward, but we didn't create a lot. And the only thing I'll extrapolate out of it, because again, it was 19 minutes. That's not enough to even be concerned all that much about. But I think they set up with a diamond midfield in kind of a 3-5-1-1 with the midfield kind of in a 4. And I think the reason why I may even mention that is one of the things I'm fascinated to see what happens going into Sunday, more so than today. I think Alkmaar is going to do what Alkmaar does, which is, pretty much playing 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1. Is more so whether Rangers go with a diamond midfield, and because they started doing that a little bit late last season in the 4-1 defeat, they did that, and I can see some tactical reasons why they would do that. So we didn't blow away St Mirren in those 19 minutes against a diamond midfield. Is that anything to take away from it? Again, I'm grasping at straws here to try and look for something that could be to take out on potentially as a concern coming out of the game. But other than that, I mean, yeah, it was. The only other thing I'll say is that there is a huge amount of value in doing what you're supposed to be doing, and that's one of my criticisms that I had for Celtic generally and on a performance basis, meaning that if we're going to benchmark ourselves against the Ajaxes and the Salzburgs of the world, the Benficas, we should be beating these kinds of teams this way more regularly. And certainly when they're down to 10 men. So performing up to where we should be and blowing them away this way more frequently is a good sign. And I think we have some other risks. I wrote an article about that today, or not today, this week. And we saw that in the Hearts game, where if you're conceding more chances, variability can go the other direction. So if you're getting 4 XG, that's great. But if you're conceding 1.25 just through randomness, that means you're giving up more chances, and that some of those can go in. And their teams lose games where they get 4 XG and they concede 1.25, much more than they do if they get 2.5 XG and concede like 0.1. Because there's just teams rarely score when they only have those kind of chances. So there's kind of a compounding effect of risk the more chances you give up, and that's that we'll talk about that more as we look towards the AZ game, the AZ game today. So.
Yeah. Well, one thing that will give Celtic fans nightmares is the fact that Celtic I think they were unbeaten in the first 10 games last year before the first derby match of the year, and then it all fell apart after that. The difference this year, I would argue, is that we were stammering and stuttering over the smaller size last year at this time of the year before we eventually got beat by Rangers in the first derby of the season. That's when it all fell apart. So I think the signs are better this year that even if the derby doesn't go the way that we wanted, I don't think the result will be as catastrophic as it was last season. There are a couple of comments coming in. Afternoon to everyone who is watching on YouTube. If you are watching, do drop us a comment, drop us your thoughts on the game tonight, and any questions you want to put to the lads as well. We'll get to them some later on in the show as well. So, Alan, I guess one thing that happened at the weekend that will probably impact this game tonight, and one thing that was highlighted by you two guys on the show before, is Christie in midfield playing with McGregor and Turnbull. He played as the 8. What was your thoughts on how it was implemented, and did you think it was effective?
Yep. So watching the game in real time live, Christie didn't really resonate with me. I didn't really pick up a lot of what he was doing, which is my naive mistake because I should know better. And then when I watch it back, you realise the range of things he's contributing to. I mean, he had more successful passes than McGregor, for example, and only 10 less than Turnbull. Didn't have to do a lot of sort of defensive stuff. He won one challenge, which is actually one more than McGregor and Turnbull had to do. He was actually probably the third most involved player in terms of total actions on the pitch. He actually created four chances. Now, some of those might not. I think his expected assists was relatively low at 0.36. So I don't think they were great chances. They were probably passes for long shots, maybe a little bit. But he still created 4 chances. He was still the third best in terms of forward passing. And I suppose he only had one shot, which is probably quite unlike him, really. But he was second to Abada in having a number of touches in the box at 10. So again, you see Christie contributing across a whole range of defensive, creative, and attacking contributions, which I think that 8 role was perfect for him. So it was very difficult to say how much he influenced the game overall because of the nature of the game and the situation of it. But for me, he's born for that role, and I wouldn't be surprised if he plays there tonight. I know we'll probably come on to that. Alternatively, he may be preferred on the left, but we'll talk about that later.
And just to finish off in the game, I know you mentioned that you wanted to mention Karl Starfelt,
yes,
and what he did in the game. So, how do you judge a player when there's a 6-0 win, especially a centre back?
Yeah, I'm actually going to judge him not on what he did, but what he didn't do. Okay. And he didn't do a lot.
I'm interested in this now. I am. You piqued my interest when you said you wanted to mention him.
Yeah, and it started as I watched the first leg of the AZ game, and obviously he had a bad night. That there was 2 errors that led to their best chances of the night. Both came on his side, but obviously the first thing is that they've shifted him to right centre back and moved Welsh to left centre back. Now that intuitively doesn't make a lot of sense because Starfelt's played a lot on the left, and Welsh hasn't looked comfortable on the left. When he's played there before. But actually, it's turned out pretty well in the sense that Welsh is now playing as the dominant centre back. So if you think of Julian, Ayer, first contact, certainly for any aerial ball, would generally be Julian in that partnership. Welsh, as I say, is as I mentioned many times, is not particularly tall for a centre back, but he is the one that's now initiating first contact. And Starfeld's, who actually in his first 2-3 games, his challenge, dual win rates, loss rates were actually pretty good, and then he suddenly had a couple of absolute nightmares off the cliff type performances. What it looks like to me, long story short, is, and I tell you that in the first couple of games he was making 10, 12 packing passes. What I think's happened is that every facet of his game, he's been told to simplify. And to be not passive, but be almost like the more the sweeper than the first contact defender. And I think my interpretation of that is that that's incredibly good management from the manager, who's trying to protect him because he realizes the pace of the game, the physicality of the game is proving to be quite a challenge for him and fitting into Celtic's way of playing with a particularly high line. And also, he doesn't have a lot of support in terms of aerial challenges beside him from fullbacks. It's all on him if the ball comes into his sector, right? So it looks to me like there's a deliberate ploy almost of, if I say protecting him, that sounds a little bit patronising, but almost of but it almost is that to let him grow into the game a little more. And it's been very noticeable how he's dropped off on his contributions, his general contribution. And perhaps he's being told, just concentrate on your positioning, just concentrate on sweeping up, watch the second balls, be there for those, and then just basically simplify your game, because he's still matched Welsh in terms of sort of recoveries. But as I say, whereas Starfelt in his first game had over 100 completed passes, he had 40 compared to Welsh's 84 against St Mirren at 100%. So he's doing the simple thing. He's keeping it really, really basic. And I think that's a way to help him to integrate quicker into the team. And as I say, I think that's really smart management.
Yeah. So it's clearly our left centre back that is the one that's carrying the ball and being led as the man who's going to be linking the defence with the midfield then.
Yeah. And in fact, you've picked up on a good point. Is what's been really noticeable in the last two games is the number of ball carries that Welsh had. In fact, in the St Mirren game, he had 7 progressive runs, so that's more than anybody else in the team. Now we've never seen that from Steve Welsh, but that's completely new, right? So there's an impact here, and they're actually putting more pressure onto Welsh, and Welsh's workload has gone up, and he's having to fight for more first contact balls. And in fact, against St Mirren, even Curtis Main is a pretty muscular guy, right? And he fights hard for the ball in the air. And Welsh was 6 and 5 on challenges, right? So his numbers weren't fantastic. Main roughed him up a few times, so it's a risk. But I think there's a little bit going on there. Welsh is taking on more responsibility. Starfelt's being allowed to feel his way into the team, I think. That's my reading of it anyway.
James, do you want to come in on that?
Well, I thought it was interesting, just observationally. Starfelt being the deepest, closer to the halfway line, even when, against 10 men. And then you almost had like a 3-man next line where you had Welsh, McGregor, and then Ralston is kind of the inverted fullback with Abada wide and then Taylor wide. And, against 10 men, St Mirren, that I don't think there's not a lot of risk there. And I think if with Christie constituting the right side of midfielder, that's a lot of athleticism in that next layer of position for transition. And again, it was St Mirren with 10 men. I'll be curious to see if we play that way today, because that creates a lot more risk on the flanks against pace, I would think. I mean, you tell me, Alan. If you've got Welsh wide and Ralston inverted with Starfelt dead central, that if any of those guys get beat or we just get a bad bounce, then all of a sudden you've got kind of 2-on-1, 1-on-1 type of opportunities with Starfelt kind of as the last guy. And we know that's, with his pace, that's not a situation we're going to be fond of getting into. So I'll be curious to see whether we end up setting up like that. Because I agree with Alan. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense given that opponent in those situations. I think it's putting Starfelt in a position to succeed more rather than asking him to do things that maybe he's not yet comfortable doing on a sliding scale, obviously. And Welsh has been showing that he's more comfortable doing a lot of those things, including being aggressive in coming forward to challenge balls. So, we'll see. I think that's the big thing against the St Mirren at home. That seems like a good plan. Whether it's going to be deployed against better opponents on the road, and whether that's a good idea or not, I think that'll be the next kind of question. Sorry,
James, just on that point then very quickly. AZ didn't have a big physical centre forward. They're kind of quick, clever players up front, but they do like to get the ball forward very quickly, and they therefore do play quite a lot of high balls. And against them, Welsh was 12 and 2 on challenges. Mm-hmm. So he actually was pretty dominant in the air against them. So that'll be interesting to see if they're going to play the same way. He's going to, because he's not a particularly aerially dominant guy, but he did very well that night.
Yeah, they're not particularly big. They actually don't really challenge aggressively. They're looking, to your point you've written about this week about kind of a pseudo Cluj. In ways they're looking to win that second ball more so than aerially competing. And I think that's where I think about risk, in that if you get kind of lines of Starfelt and he's central, and then you've got Welsh coming in to attack balls, even if he wins them just with randomness and luck. I mean, winning those balls is one thing, controlling where they go to a teammate is a second level of, that's not that common with any kind of certainty, meaning that even if you're good at that, maybe you're doing it 60% of the time. You're not directing those kind of headers 90% of the time directly to a teammate. So that creates kind of a chaos. And those second balls, if they're won, to your point, they like to play direct. They've got those guys out wide, pacey. Carlson's coming back, probably, I'm assuming. So that's, again, when I think of the pieces and how they're fitting together here, that's where I start to get a little nervous if we're going to play that same way. And it doesn't mean it's not going to work. It's always going to be, if you get a couple of bad bounces, some unlucky things that happen. And we had a few things. This is when my rewatch of the game last week, I counted 7 different chances in the first half hour where they could have done something a lot more threatening if there was a little bit better decision, or if there was maybe just a luckier bounce in their direction versus our direction. So there's really fine margins sometimes in some of these games. And I think last Tuesday was a good example of that, or I'm sorry, last Wednesday was a good example of that. So those are the kind of things that teams like Cluj and Alkmaar feast off of, is some of that randomness that is just kind of inherent to the second balls.
Well, let's get into the game tonight then. Celtic obviously come into this game with a 2-0 win in Parkhead last week, so 2-0 advantage going into this game. If you're watching on YouTube, keep the comments coming. We are the Huddle Breakdown. We're part of Breakdown Inc., which is a fan media hub here on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel below, and you can get us on podcast as well, on iTunes, on Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts as well. And you can follow us on Twitter at The Breakdown Inc. is where you can get The Breakdown Inc. and at Huddle Breakdown is where you can get us, the podcast specifically. So let's start with tonight. There is a few comments coming in here that I do want to touch on. And Strangelove the Doctor, Frank Brennan, they're all bringing up one person in particular, and that is Greg Taylor. So James, you highlighted this last week, that Greg Taylor was the man that AZ targeted, and that seems to be where they're going to be going tonight as well. So I know you have a few concerns going into this game. So what are your concerns and why?
My concerns are in transition generally. So I think, Taylor's somebody that most opposition have been targeting with those high kind of balls down that right side, because for obvious reasons. I mean, he's just not a big guy. So he doesn't do all that well in aerial duels. So if you're going to target high balls for aerial duels to pick up second balls, he's a pretty good person to do that against. I actually think he's okay in transition. I mean, there's my big concern with him in that regard is athletically. I mean, he's just not the quickest and fastest guy. And Al-Bakal, or number 17, as I called him last week, I suspect he's going to be on the right side today. And if Carlson's coming back in, which he was clearly their most threatening player going forward and very pacey. And so I think that could be a challenging matchup for Taylor in and that right-sided fullback wasn't lightning quick or fast, but he was pretty good on the ball. Sakanawa, I think was his name, or Saganawa. Shugawara. Yeah. So, I think I'm more worried about the system dynamics here rather than any specific player. I think it's the mix. I've been trying to think of an analogy that I can communicate this to people, and it's the best one I could come up with in the shower yesterday was it's almost, if you think about this like a game of Jenga, right, and how the pieces of Jenga fit together. You can have those pieces as wood, you can have them as pieces of cardboard, right? You can have them as pieces of iron, and if they stack together, they're resilient, right? Obviously, you want stronger material that fit together. And if Celtic had an unlimited budget, we could have gold squares stacking on top of each other. But what happens if you buy, an iron piece, but it's not shaped right? It's curved, and you're stacking pieces of curved Jenga pieces on top of each other, right? The system, right? The tower can be less robust, less resilient. And I think that's, you can have someone who's a better player, quote unquote, overall, but if the pieces aren't fitting together in a robust system, the tower can be more vulnerable to, getting poked when you pull out one of the pieces that comes tumbling down. And that's my concern heading into tonight, is that with the way they play, they are an incredibly smart club. They've had a week to plan for us. They rescheduled their game on the weekend specifically to get ready for this game. They are going to be prepared. They basically completely shut down McGregor last week in build-up play. They had number 10 standing on his, man marking him regularly to the point where, his involvement in build-up was down about a third versus where it had been, versus Jablonek or versus, completely shut down. I'm not saying he had no involvement. What I'm saying is they clearly targeted him as a key person. So they're a very smartly run team. And they're going to come prepared, and they're going to have a game plan. And I see vulnerabilities there that we got some luck on last week, and I suspect they're going to see them too and target certain things. And depending on our selection and availability, that's why I get nervous. And again, it's a single game; anything can happen. I mean, we could dominate, and they could hit 3 shots from 30 yards. You know what I mean? So any of these things can happen. But when I think about kind of the risk profile of how this might lining up, that's why I'm so nervous. And that's why I tweeted when we got that second goal, it was a huge relief. If we'd only won that game by 1 goal, I would have been paranoid delusional levels of worried going into tonight. So now I'm just a healthy dose of nervous.
Yeah. I'm glad you chose Jenga, because I understand that. Usually you choose some American show that happened in the 1980s or
some nonsense sport nobody watches.
some fancy.
Hey, watch that.
Some fancy, psychologist in some book that I've never heard of.
Yeah,
I actually understand your analogy tonight, so thank you for that. Also, thank you to Marco, who says he comes for the stats but stays for Enda's sponsors break. That's not that's not coming tonight, unfortunately, but it might be coming over the next couple of weeks. So anybody who's missed that, you can go back and watch my Manscaped read from last week. There's a comment in here from Ewan Boy Martin, who says that McGregor, Turnbull, Rogic will start in the midfield tonight, as they are the strongest players for control and to create. So that does lead me on to the main conversation around this game, is Celtic's approach. So I would have said that last week Celtic's approach was brave. They went out to win the game. They took a risk playing McGregor playing as a 6, and ultimately deserved to win the game because they took the game to AZ. But going into this game, second leg, needing to win, or needing at least to not concede too many goals, do Celtic go brave with their midfield choice again, with that starting lineup of Turnbull, Rogic, McGregor or Christie? Or do they go with a James McCarthy or a Sorrow as the 6 and move Cal McGregor a little bit further forward? That's where I think is most interesting going to this game. So, Alan, what do you think is the best move, and what do you think we should do?
So to me, brave would be to change the way that Celtic play and to bring in a McCarthy or a Sorrow. I say brave, I actually mean probably a little bit foolhardy. Why would you tell a team that's racked up, over 3 in XG, 15 shots, and actually controlled large parts of the first leg? Why would you tell them to go and play differently? I just wouldn't, and I don't think Postecoglou will. So my reading of the game is quite different. We definitely, and I think a lot of people's perception gets framed by what happens in the first 5 minutes sometimes, and it was a really bad first more than 5 minutes, to be fair. The Hart save with the foot was probably the culmination. We didn't look comfortable. They looked like they could play through us with ease. As I said, I think James rightly actually set up the fact that he wondered if there was a team that had kind of played through Celtic to that extent in recent times, and actually he was spot on. Their sort of packing score of 388 was really, you're going back to games like Lazio and Milan and Lille. I mean, these are top teams, right, to get an equivalent packing rate. So this is the level of opposition that we're on at, right? But in terms of, if you watch that game back, once Celtic got that goal within, what it was, 11 minutes, from the 11th minute pretty much through to 5 minutes before half time, they had a few. Abuklal had 5 of their sort of 8 shots, had a few chances that weren't good, but Celtic largely controlled the game for a good 30 minutes. And then what happened was for the last 5 minutes, they managed to get a series of corners, and it was just a sort of momentum of pressure on the Celtic goal. The slightly worrying thing for me was that when the teams came out at half time, that momentum for them continued. And for me, it was looking quite worrying until we got the second goal in 61 minutes. We hadn't really created a lot between half time. Rogic had a kind of long shot. Forrest had a decent chance. But what really again gives me confidence for tonight, and is that once we got to around about the 67th minute, and then the substitutions in the 75th minute, and we brought on Montgomery on the left, who's quite a bit more of a physical, athletic player, and then obviously McCarthy in the centre. We didn't stop pressing, but we stopped pressing relentlessly, and we started to press very carefully and make very good decisions about when to press. And then when we weren't pressing, we were sat in, I would call it a medium block. It wasn't even a low block; it was a medium block, and it was very solid, and it was very compact, and from the 67th minute, when again Abuklal headed over from a corner from inside the 6-yard box. It wasn't a good chance. Headers from corners really are. They didn't have a single shot at goal until Koopmeiners had an absolute stupid shot from 40 yards in added time. They didn't have a single shot at goal. Now, there were a few moments, there were a few bits of danger. They got into the box quite a lot, but they didn't have a single shot at goal. And I just felt that for the vast majority of that game, Celtic controlled it on their terms. And I think that showed to me a maturity, a flexibility from Postecoglou. It wasn't this, we talk about going brave as in he's just going to gung-ho throw players forward. He was very, very clear about that this week, that, look, I don't set out my teams to concede goals. I don't set out the teams to concede lots of chances. He just takes the view that if you put the opposition under pressure, and if you're forcing the opposition goalkeeper to make 6 or 7 saves, and their goalkeeper made six saves in that game, you're going to get some Alnwick moments where 3 of them go through his hands, right? Whereas if you're only firing 1 or 2 shots at the goalkeeper, to James's point about having 0.1 xg, then those bits of variance are unlikely to happen. So Postecoglou's theory is we're going to put you under pressure. Now there is risk to that, clearly, but you're going to have to defend well, and you're going to have to get some luck, and your goalkeeper's going to have to play well, because we're going to create a lot of chances. Why would you change that? So to me, the combination of the number of chances Celtic created, the fact they scored 2 goals, I know one of them was lucky, but they underperformed their xG on the night, and the fact that they controlled large parts of those games, and those are the bits of the games, because nothing was happening, that we tend to forget. But to me, they were the bits I really enjoyed, watching back, because of the tactical element of it, and because of the solidity I felt that we had in those moments, especially crucially seeing it out at 2-0. That gives me confidence, and I would be very disappointed if we don't play the same way.
Okay. I should say before I move on that Sean F makes a very valid point in the comments that James McCarthy is not actually with the squad tonight. Himself and Forrest are out for this game. So it would be Sorrow playing in that position, which I think is a very different prospect to James McCarthy playing in that number 6 position. So James, what are your thoughts on this? Because if your concerns are on the transition, then surely a more pragmatic approach would be the way to go.
Yeah, I wouldn't characterize it as pragmatic. I think, I agree with Alan. And I don't think we should be playing a different way. I think it's a question of what are the vulnerabilities depending on selection. So, my concerns are more so As I said, the Jenga pieces fitting together and the risks relative to transition. So if we're going to have a midfield of McGregor and Rogic and Turnbull, just athletically, they're not the best against transition. Then you have, if you put in Abada and Ralston on the right, they can be a little sloppy with their passing, not really in the final third. I mean, Abada's been terrific in the final third. But he's been pretty sloppy in the middle third in kind of giving balls away. He did against Alkmaar in the prior game, one of them that led to their big chance early that Hart saved with that tremendous right foot. So what I did is I went back and I looked at Alkmaar and their games against comparable opponents the last couple of seasons. Well, actually, really the last 3 seasons. So looking at like a Feyenoord, a PSV, Ajax in the league, and then teams like Napoli and who else they played, Antwerp, Man United, LASK. And I don't think they're going to come out and steamroll us. I don't think I don't think they're good enough for that, meaning that their talent level isn't off the charts. They're just extremely well run. They're more like a tactical strike team, a tactical strike force. And when they've been successful at this level, I'll give you an example. I mean, they beat Feyenoord 4-2 with basically similar XG, right? So that when they get a little bit of variance in their direction, you know, they're going to keep it close, I think. And to Alan's point, he's right. In those first 13 minutes or 12 minutes, whatever it was before we scored, you know, they basically had the balance of play, had much better chances. And if just 1 or 2 of those could have very easily gone in, and, you know, and they always say on a different day, or 1 or 2 of the other really good opportunities had created a better chance than they ended up resulting in. Or if, you know, Hart's kick out doesn't deflect off of their player and go straight to one of ours, it bounces back to a guy who's standing right on the 18 with no one around them, because that was possible, right? That it would just been bad luck, but those things happen. And Hart had another kick out later that just missed. He shanked it and just missed one of their attackers. He reached for it and didn't quite get it. And he had a teammate standing all alone right in front of goal who would have been onside, that he could have passed it to had he been able to control it. So it's these fine margins where I think it's going to be close enough where if we have a lot of second balls and we pick the wrong people, the mix of people where there's going to be more of those transitions. That's a, you know, I'm stealing Alan's phrase all the time anymore with toxic combinations. And I don't mean this in this anywhere near the sense that we saw last season. So I'm talking about on the fine margins, right? So whether or not they're going to get a couple of extra chances in the game, and that by definition, you know, instead of them having 0.8 XG, they end up with 1.2, and they have a couple of better chances, like the one that Hart saved. Well, what if Hart doesn't save it tonight? You know, and it's in the 5th minute. You know, you end up with a totally different game potentially, and that's I think they're going to get those opportunities. It's a question of the volume and the quality depending on who we end up picking. So I'd prefer to see Christie in midfield. Because of that, you know, with Forrest out, I mean, Abada's going to play. So I'd really be worried. I wrote this. I'd be worried with Rogic and Abada on that same side with Ralston, with Carlson coming back. So that's my focal point, more so than Taylor, even, although that is a concern as well.
Before I get your predictions, then anything else that you just want to highlight going into this game?
I think he'll go with Christie on the left, and I think
you're probably right.
And I think he'll put Kyogo back in the middle. And the reason that makes sense is because for 2 things. The most of the ball progression for them came from the right back, Shigarawa.
As you can see, we're amazing with names.
Yeah, the Japanese kid. And the guy who scored the own goal, Letchert, actually had more progressive passes than anybody else in the game. So I think the combination of Christie and Kyogo, you know, putting the pressure on them will really stop them gathering momentum, because they want to get the ball through the lines more quickly. Celtic will be a little bit more circumspect. They want to keep the ball. They want to get the ball forward, but they want to keep it as well. He said they're not too bothered about keeping the ball, but they want to get it forward. So if you can put pressure on those guys, the right back, especially in the right centre back, and you've got Kyogo and Chris, you've got the right people to do that, then I think we'll see pressure. I take James's point. There's always risk in the way that Celtic is set up, and especially out wide on transition is always going to be a risk. And there will be a game, maybe more than one game this season, where Ange Ball completely unravels and we lose 5-0. It will happen, because that's just the nature of it. Hopefully it's not tonight, but so I think it will be Christie on the left for me. I think therefore Rogic will play. I will eat my little round microphone ball if Sorrow starts. I don't see any way that will happen.
I can't see that happening either. And I remember writing down my notes from the last game, and it was when Celtic were 1-0 up and they took on Odsonne Edouard, and then he wasn't directly involved in it, but they scored a couple of minutes after that, and it was a decision that last year the thought of bringing Odsonne Edouard or not starting with Odsonne Edouard on the pitch was beyond comprehension. The fact that we have a striker like him to come off the bench is something that is going to come in handy if Celtic are either behind or if they want to come in and solidify a draw or try push on for a win in this game. So I think Celtic are in a decent enough position going into this. So we do want to talk about the Rangers game this weekend. So we'll get your predictions for this game first. James, do you want to go first? Do you think Celtic are going to go through here?
I'm hoping we squeak through. I as my analytical cap, if I take off my shaded glasses, I'm going to say 3-2 Alkmaar.
3-2 Alkmaar, which would be Celtic going through, just about. Alan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we'll get a positive result. Maybe a 1-1 draw. Maybe I think we'll be positive. And I think there was lots of encouraging signs that I saw in that first. Like I do accept the fact that maybe we did get the rub of the green on some respects. I think them not playing at the weekend was a mistake.
Yeah,
they've only played 2 games this season. They needed games, and they needed to bed in what is a new system, because they've had a few key players leave, and they've not done that, and I think that's going to be a mistake for them.
Yeah. Especially how early it is in their season that even just getting game time under their legs is so crucial going into a game against Celtic, who have so many games under their belt at this point and are starting to pick up fitness from where they were at the start of the season. A lot of 2-2s coming in the comments, by the way. I think it's going to be probably 2-2, maybe 1-1. I can't see Celtic winning, but I think they will go through. I'm confident they will go through anyway. But this is not the only big game of the week for Celtic. The first derby of the year is taking place this Sunday. It's in Ibrox. And of course, going into it, there's always a bit of narrative going into a Celtic Rangers game. I mean, this year it is COVID once more. Rangers have had a couple of close contacts, a couple of positive cases within their camp ahead of their European fixture tonight. And there are a couple of people who are confirmed to be out. Now, this may change. There's a lot of moving plates, a lot of different rule changes, a lot of things that the SFA can make, decisions that they can make going into this game that could affect it. So as of now, as of when we're speaking, McGregor will be out, Tavernier will be out, and Kent will be out. That's who we think will be out for this game. And there could be more, there could be less. So that's what I could find. That's the information I could find. If anybody
say those again.
McGregor, Tavernier, and Kent.
Okay.
They're the 3 key players that I would say.
So McLaughlin would be available.
Yeah, as far as I know, there could be changes. If anybody has seen any new information since we started recording this podcast, do let me know.
Breaking news.
How would you know Enda? How would you know Enda if nobody is prepared to ask the 2 questions that need to be asked? And they're very simple questions. Number 1, which players have tested positive? Number 2, when did they test positive? And nobody has asked that question.
Do you know
nobody's prepared to ask that question?
There is another question that I was wondering about this, because it does affect things, and I don't know what the rules are in Scotland, so I could be wrong. But who are they not vaccinated?
Yeah, so
because in Ireland, the close contacts, if you're a close contact and you're vaccinated, you're fine. You don't have to get a test. You don't have to self-isolate. You don't have to do anything like that there if you're fully vaccinated. So I'm confused by that.
If they were vaccinated, even if they'd been in contact, they would have been allowed to travel. So either the players who have not travelled are either been in contact and have not been vaccinated, or they're tested positive, or they have another injury.
Yeah, or they're keeping them fit for this game. So
there's a third scenario, and I don't want to get bogged into vaccine or pandemic politics or analysis, but the UK technical report through August 6th was just released, and we're seeing this in Israel, we're seeing it in the United States. So basically, the countries that were early to vaccinate, there are breakthrough cases that are occurring. So again, I'm not saying they did this. This is raw meat for conspiracy theorists, no matter what happens here. But I could see a decision being made from a risk management perspective. I mean, if somebody were vaccinated with AstraZeneca, for example, and they had a direct contact of someone who tested positive, let's say someone who wasn't vaccinated, came down positive on the team, somebody's an AstraZeneca double vaccination person and it happened 6 months ago or 5 months ago, which is kind of the timeline with what they call this titering of the antibodies. So you could have a risk management decision to say, okay, we don't, because if they get that wrong and there's these breakthrough cases, you could be ended up with a super spreader event. Where people are testing positive, and I'm not talking about disease or going to hospital or anything like that. I'm just saying testing positive. So that is happening now, where people that were vaccinated are testing positive for COVID. And so from a risk management perspective, I could see that being a decision that somebody would make because they're flying on planes. I mean,
it's close quarters and
of course,
hotel, everything like that there. So I do apologize for my ignorance on the topic when it comes to this, and I can only say this is all the reports that we're working off here. So the reports are that those three players haven't traveled to Europe. That doesn't mean they've tested positive. That doesn't mean they're close contacts, but it certainly is pointing in that direction.
Yeah, but the point is, Enda, that based on the history and context of Scottish football, we should be demanding full transparency about this.
Well, we will find out on Sunday, but I guess if anybody's looking to find out what the score is in the Rangers game so far, they are 0-0 with Ashkirk FC in the Europa League qualification. They are 1-0 up on aggregate, so they'll go through as the results stand. I think Ashkirk got a player sent off in that game as well, so that's how they're getting on in Europe at the minute. Let's talk about the derby this weekend, and I guess it's quite similar to this game in Europe against AZ, that it's all about how Celtic approach the game. How will they approach this game? How will they line out the team? Will they go for the win? I think Ange will go for the kill here. I think he sees that Rangers are not as strong as they were last year, that this can't have been helpful, the COVID news during the week. And I think Celtic are ripe for a good win here, Alan. I'm not sure if you fully agree with me on that.
So it's an interesting one because it's very unlikely that they will play very differently to how they always play, because they actually, and when I say they're predictable, I don't mean that in a negative sense. They have a very distinctive and definite way of playing. Now the shape can be, as James says, it could be a variation in 4-4-2, or it could be a 4-3-3. But the basic principle of keeping controlled possession as much as possible, even if it means not necessarily playing very quickly, but keeping that control of keeping a very, 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 again, rigid is the wrong word, but certainly a very compact shape, and moving together across the pitch, keeping very disciplined about distances between players, of not just banging crosses into the box, of playing very controlled, trying to work the ball into the box, into optimal shooting. These are all really sensible, good things to do, and they're very well drilled and very well organized to do all of those things. They're not going to change fundamentally how they play. They have no idea how Celtic are going to play. They can watch the videos of the game, the 9 games so far, but they've not experienced a team playing like this against them, and that's going to be fascinating. And so, you might think, my initial thought around Postecoglou in terms of risks was, when you hear the anecdotes about I want my teams to play the way that my dad would want them to play, and that's a great story. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking Tommy Burns. I'm thinking 6 players bombing forward, and Derek White at the back on his own, and all this sort of stuff. And just thinking, oh no, But actually, what I've seen, and I'm specifically referencing Midtjylland home when we went down to 10 players, and seeing out the AZ game is, he's a smart guy. He's a smart tactician. This isn't going to be, a cavalry charge, a light brigade moment. This is going to be controlled, aggressive, attacking, relentless play like we've seen in all the games since Midtjylland, frankly. Now, and therefore, I look back at the last 2 seasons of derby games, and if you actually average them all out, they're absolute coin tosses overall in terms of the actual numbers across the metrics, and yet they've won sort of 71% of the points and we've won 29%. And actually, the only things that I would say we've been outplayed on would be they're slightly stronger on ball progression and on transitions, and they are better at, because of this patient approach of getting more touches in the box, not by a lot but by a little bit. And then the other major difference that stands out, if you look at the data across the 2 teams, is just that Celtic have made more defensive errors, frankly, in those games. There's really, really been nothing between, but the Rangers have had the better outcomes. Now, you could almost discount 2 of those games, because the 2-0 win that they had at Celtic Park in September, when we had our COVID crisis and we had, was it Klamala or Johnson up front, and just an absolute shambles of a team, and we didn't have a single shot, was a bit of an outlier. And then the very last game of the season when they won 4-1, when if they'd won the league, we'd kind of given up. But even if you add those games in, it's absolutely 50-50 in terms of that data. But we're talking about a Rangers team that was settled, had 2 players in every position. Any injury they did get, and they didn't get as many as Celtic, was compensated by a player of very similar ability coming in. We know that and this is the modern football data from Ortec, they overperformed on XG by nearly 1 goal a game. Now, I've never seen that before. I'm pretty sure that's not sustainable to be 1 goal above XG in every single game. We know about the players that weren't sent off and subsequently were, and the no penalties and the no records, and all that variance seemed to go one way. So all of those variance elements, the expected goals outcome, the COVID outcomes, all of those things went one way, and this was the worst Celtic team in memory in the last 10, 12 years in terms of our performances. And there was almost parity across the data across the last 8-9 fixtures. So that gives me hope, that because what the Celtic that they're going to see on Sunday is very different to the Celtic they've seen in the last 9 games.
I think last year it was very evident that the physicality and just sheer athleticism of Rangers was well ahead of where Celtic were at that point in time, and that's something that you highlighted, James. I know you've been doing a lot of work on formations and things like that about Rangers coming into this game, but firstly, your thoughts on Celtic's athleticism and the difference that's going to make in this game, because the Celtic team that this Rangers side are going to meet this year are entirely different in everything that they do in terms of work off the ball.
Yeah, I have very little confidence in trying to forecast this game. Which is why I think it's so fascinating. I mean, I love this game and this matchup as someone who's analytically minded, because it's extremely challenging. You have so many unknowns. Throw in this COVID stuff now. That's an even another layer of complexity. And I did a couple of threads on Rangers earlier this week. They're conflicting, meaning that I think there are some structural problems as to why Rangers' performance levels, to Alan's point, the vast majority of their ability to win they earned the points last season that they did was that confluence of different variants, that 31 goals of outperformance between outperforming in attack and also outperforming in defense. Throw on top of that a really good season from Alan McGregor, which was good for another 7 or 8 goals. And then you have the 10-1 penalties, and I think it was 6-1 red cards or 6-0 red cards, something like that. So you throw all that together, that kind of masked what was an underlying decline in chance creation, and net what I call, not what I call, but what is non-penalty XG differentials, right? So their actual underlying performance metrics had deteriorated more so after the holiday season. So that's what I documented. I have a theory as to why that happened. I think they're struggling with creativity out of the midfield is my kind of analysis. But, and this is the big but, I do a lot of trend work, and they have started to recover, meaning that if you look at late last season, they really were in a downturn, and it looks like they may have kind of bottomed out here. And some of that's just natural. You get into a new season, players are refreshed a little bit, and I think that creates a disparity between better teams versus lesser teams, where the better teams are fit and fresh. There's some seasonality to that, as I would call it. So I think we're going to get a really good version of them. This new COVID variable, I think that depending on who's out, it could be for example, I'm much more worried seeing Patterson at right back than I would have been with Tavernier, to be honest with you. I think Patterson's athleticism is a much bigger concern, his speed, his quickness, relative. I would much rather see Kyogo and or Edouard or Forrest out there on the left going up against Tavernier athletically versus a Patterson, for example. So I think there's positives and negatives to what this might end up meaning. McGregor has not been good this season, so it could be a blessing in disguise for them if McLaughlin's the one that plays theoretically. The other part I'll say is I'm fascinated because I went back and I looked. I could not find much in the way of teams that played a diamond midfield against Ange's system in Japan. And this reminds me of back prior to the January 2nd derby, when I did my homework to see about people that played the diamond midfield against Liverpool or Rangers 4-3-3 and hadn't really found too many examples, but the ones that had been quite good. And so I'm curious to see whether they do go with a diamond, because just to my mind, it would create some issues with the way we're playing. And again, I expect we'll make adjustments. I expect, as Alan said, I mean, everything that I've seen so far from Ange brings confidence, more confidence than less. But it's a matchup thing, and it's new from both directions. So that's what makes it so exciting and interesting. So I'm curious how between selection and how each team sets up, because I don't have a good sense one way or the other.
Yeah, I think it's certainly more of an interesting game than last year's in terms of, just intrigue of how each team are going to set up. I do want to interrupt our preview of the derby this weekend because the team news is in for this evening. I'll start with AZ Alkmaar's team. They've gone with a 4-3-3, Velhurst in nets, Sugawara at right back, Leschert and Martin Zindi are the centre backs. Witry is the left back. Mitsro, DeWitt and Cooper Miners are the midfield three. Abukal, Pavlidis and Carlson are the front three for AZ Alkmaar. And Celtic have gone with a 4-3-3. Joe Hart's in nets, Taylor at left back, Ralston right back, Starfield at the right side of defence, with Welsh at the left. So similar to what you mentioned at the weekend, Alan. Turnbull, McGregor and Rogic are the midfield three. Rogic on the right-hand side. And Abada, Furhashi and Christie on the left-hand side up front for Celtic. So it's pretty much spot on to what you predicted earlier on the show, Alan. So I guess we'll interrupt the preview of the Rangers game for immediate reaction to that team.
Yeah, as I say, that's what I would have expected. Just I think the energy that gives in terms of where they've got threat, bringing the ball forward, that makes a lot of sense. to me. I think probably Edouard and Kyogo's a little bit risky in terms of just that pressing from the front. I think I think Celtic are going to be on it and putting them under pressure from the beginning. So that's the right team to do it. Other than that, I don't think there's a lot of choice really. I'm looking at the bench. We've got a lot of got four kids there. Urhoghide, Shaw, Robertson, Montgomery, Bolingoli, who we don't suspect is going to have a future at Celtic, and then you've got Bitton, Ajeti, Soro, and Edouard. So, it's actually obviously you can bringing on Edouard is huge and massively can improve the team in a moment, but you can see why we're still a long way short in terms of the squad of where we need to be.
Yeah, exactly. So just to return to the Rangers game this weekend then, so I guess the lineups will obviously make a huge difference going into this game. The mind games have already started between the fans, and I suppose there's massive intrigue in this game all the time. It's live on Sky Sports actually, so Sky showing a bit of interest for once in their life in the Scottish League, despite having the rights to the league. I don't know why BT didn't get them. I mean, BT does such a stellar job compared to Sky Sports, but that's a side point. Just to finish up, I guess, going into the game, I don't think it's make or break. I don't think the season will fall apart like it did last year if Celtic don't win it. But what are your thoughts on what happens if Celtic lose, James? You're on mute.
How professional was that? I had dogs barking. That's why I put it on. I don't think it's make or break, as I said earlier. I think this is a marathon, not a sprint. Obviously prefer to get a result of some sort. But I'm actually more concerned about what happens between now and midnight Tuesday with the remainder of the transfer window. Because what the relative quality of the squad is for Ange is over 38 games is my paramount concern, because if he doesn't get the depth that he needs with the way that we're playing, I'm really concerned about that. Quality depth, meaning that I think with Ralston coming on, we've got some depth there now with Juranovic coming in. If Christie and or Edouard leave, that's a whole different situation than if they don't. Even if they bring in Giamakis or whatever, the Greek striker that's, the Duncan Castle reported about, we're haggling over wages apparently. So, I really want to see that more so than what result comes, because as we've seen, first games at Ibrox, who knows? Some great managers in the past have had rough games and gone on to do quite well under those circumstances. So I'm not going to get in too much of a bother analytically. I mean, I'll be going berserk if it's not a great outcome, or berserk in a good way if it is Sunday regardless. But yeah, from an analytical perspective, it's really, one of probably I would think 4 derbies in the league, and I think we need to keep our head about it in that regard.
Alan, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, fundamentally for me, the direction of travel that we're on here is hugely encouraging, and that will not change with defeat on Sunday. Okay, the fundamental approach that Postecoglou is trying to put in place, the way the team is playing, the confidence he's given the players, what they're trying to do, the outputs that they're producing, give me massive hope that this is going to be a terrific season. But the way that we play, the way that he wants the team to play, the intensity, the relentlessness of the pressing, the movement that's required, we need a big squad, and there isn't the depth there. And so I'm actually more, as exactly what James said, I'm more concerned that we get that depth in over the next week would be of greater concern to me than losing a game through some variance or whatever on Sunday. Because they've got the biggest squad in Scotland. They've got a massive squad. They've got nearly 3 players for every position, and it's pretty much like for like. Now, and we know that they've been trying to sell players for economic reasons. They may or they may not. It's not really a seller's market at the moment. If they don't, then it means they've got an enormous squad to navigate through the system, through the season. Sorry, and Celtic at the moment are absolutely threadbare, and that's the thing that needs to be resolved more than anything, because the direction of travel is absolutely the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I have a breaking topic to bring up, Enda, if that's okay, because I finally got on my phone the Alkmaar lineup. So they signed apparently a fullback from the Danish league, from Djurgården, this Wittry. So that's going to be another change. I'm assuming he'll play left back.
That's left back, yeah.
Yeah. So when we talked about the issues that they had last week, where they had that midfielder playing at left back, well, this guy's not a midfielder, and Carlson's back on the left, which puts 17 on the right. So again, I don't know if this guy's any good. I haven't looked at him at all, but he looks like actually a natural right back over time. So maybe he's playing on the opposite side. Maybe they'll flip the other guy, Sugawara, back over there. One of them is going to have to play on the side that they usually don't. But again, at least they're not a midfielder. So the guy's 25, looks like a decent size. Djurgården's a good team. I'm sorry, in Sweden, not Danish, obviously. So that's to me an important change.
So this is throwing him straight in, right?
Yeah, it looks like it. Well, again, with a week to plan. He last played on August 8th against AIK in Sweden. So that looks.
Do you know if did Carlson play in the league game?
The first league game?
Yeah, their league game. Because he hasn't played for a while either.
Yeah, pretty sure he did.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. That's fine. I presume he probably did. It was a suspension, so that makes sense. But pretty brave to chuck a guy in like that. Yeah,
he played 61 minutes.
Yeah. So listen, they've not had a lot of football. Is what it comes down to. So if you're looking for risks, there's some risks right there.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, but so basically, Gunderson dropped out, as we had talked about. Looks like it'll be Midso and Cooper Miners as those kind of two sitters, with DeWitt again at the 10. But a totally different left side with Abuklal as the right-sided winger attacking midfielder. So
get the ball to Abada then. Starting left back is just in the side, not used to the system. There's somewhere you can take advantage of 100%. So just to finish up then on this sort of preview special of the Huddle breakdown, I don't really like doing predictions, especially a couple of days out when you don't see the team, and especially when there's situations going on with COVID. But one thing I'm going to predict is that Nir Beaton will not get sent off in this game. So hopefully Celtic will stay with 11 men on the pitch, but you can never be guaranteed in these sort of fixtures. But I think Celtic are going to win. I'm not going to say a scoreline. I think just the momentum that they have at the minute is a lot better and a lot more in their favor towards a win as opposed to what happened last year. Alan, do you want to make some sort of prediction going into it?
I honestly think I don't want to shy away. I don't generally make predictions. I'll be honest with you, and this is such a difficult one to call because of this is going to be such a different proposition for them, but also for Postecoglou and the team going to Ibrox with no supporters supporting them at all. I mean, it's going to be pretty weird and probably very hostile, obviously. But will the team be full of confidence? They certainly should be. And I'm sure Postecoglou will have them well prepared. I think, the momentum, the way the team is playing, I have great hope, but I wouldn't be surprised to be disappointed. But as I say, it wouldn't change my outlook for the way that we're going. So I don't know, call that a draw.
Mm-hmm. James?
Yeah, I mean, I'd feel a lot better seeing what happens tonight. Because again, my as I keep using the phrase, how this scales, the system and the way that we're playing that looks so terrific against Dundee's and Hearts and a 10-man's. Yeah. Well, right. So again, I was a lot less optimistic on the game than you were, Alan. And I think, so that's my concern, which is we kind of had a second, when Midtjylland, another well-run team, had a second bite at the apple, gave us real problems. Now, again, different back line, Murray playing. It's apples and oranges in that sense. But Alkmaar is a significantly better team than Midtjylland. So I want to see what happens tonight. And then I totally think it's a crapshoot, but I'll say crapshoot with fat tails, meaning that you know, I expect, I could see us winning 5-0 and I could see them winning 5-0. And those outcomes that are usually extremely rare are probably multiples higher than they would normally be. Still unlikely, very unlikely, but instead of a 0.01% chance, maybe it's a 1% chance. You know what I mean? So fat tails in that sense, because there's so much unpredictability here and combustibility, and you have a really high variance style that's kind of inherent to Ange's system. That, you know, that's the thing that when you look at his track record, there are games that things just go really wrong, and some of that's just because of, you know, bad luck. And when you're playing aggressively, if you get bad luck playing aggressively, then you can, you know, catch some real beatings. So yeah, I'm not giving an actual prediction other than really, really wide band of potential outcomes.
So you're firmly on the fence. Is craps? Is that the
coward?
One
I'm a coward.
Is that the one you throw the dice in? The craps?
Craps table? Oh yeah.
I'm not. I haven't experienced a real casino in like Las Vegas or anything like that. So.
Oh yeah. Craps is a terrific game if you learn how to play it.
Yeah. So there you go.
Nice. What's it to learn?
It's actually, so that's the thing.
So you have to throw it and get the same numbers. Is that
yeah, but again,
seven a good number?
You got to be a dork like me. So just like there are people, you know, like the MIT people that learned how to count cards, and you can count cards deep into decks to be able to, you know, create probabilities that are better or at least equal to the house. There are ways to play craps where you can pretty much replicate the house odds. And if you're smart about it, you know, you can stand at a craps table and have fun for a long time without being reckless. And you know, and that, to me, that's fun. If you're at a hot craps table, there's nothing better in a casino. I mean, it's terrific. So I recommend it to anybody if they enjoy such things.
Coming up on Breakdown Inc. on the YouTube channel, James is going to teach everyone how to count cards and win a little bit of money.
I got thrown out of one casino. I did. I got thrown out of one casino for counting cards once.
I want to hear that story. I do want to hear that story at some point. We don't have time for it on today's show.
Casino Royale on the Strip in Vegas.
More, I was hoping more like Goodfellas. I thought you'd take you. No. Stick a nail through your hand.
No, I don't get. I wouldn't gamble enough. I was bet, you know, $5 and $25 kind of hands, and that's why I was so mad. I you know, the pit boss came over and gave me a tap on the shoulder, and he's, you know, all right. No goons, unfortunately.
We're definitely going to return to that at some stage of the season. I would say whenever Celtic are playing maybe St Johnson or Hibs or, you know, Hamilton or something, instead of analysing that game, we'll bring you that story about the time that James got thrown out of a casino for counting cards. That is us on the Huddle Breakdown for this week. Best of luck to Celtic tonight. Hopefully Celtic will get a win. Hopefully everyone enjoys the game and enjoys the game at the weekend as well. If you want to find more of us, you can subscribe to the channel below on YouTube or on Twitch, where you will get notified every time a video goes live, or you can get us on podcasts, on iTunes, on Spotify, and on Twitter as well, at Huddle Breakdown or at The Breakdown Inc. as well. James, Alan, thank you.
Have a good week, guys.
Yeah.
All right, we'll chat to you later. Good luck.